So, Kathy, I knew you and your podcast way before I even thought of getting you on the podcast. I think
Oh,
it was like,
cool.
yeah, so I think it was like a few months back. I'm doing what one could usually do while listening to a podcast. I'm washing dishes. I'm thinking to myself, okay, like I want something to listen to. Randomly in my head, I just thought, I wonder what Kane and Ivory Wayans is up to. And I was searching for an interview, like for, the Wayans brothers or Kane and Ivory Wayans or whatever. And I looked on Spotify for a random podcast that could give me that. And you had an episode on In Living Color
Right.
I really liked. And that's how I gradually got introduced to your podcast.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I've loved your episodes on that, on Black sitcoms, on Star Wars: The Phantom Menace, the Golden Age of Anime. I mean, you cover a very wide, very
Yeah. Yeah.
spectrum of everything that is the 90s in terms of pop culture. And I mean, I got to start with this question. I mean, what is your personal relationship to the 90s? What does it mean to you as a human being?
Well, for me, I was in my 20s in the 90s. So I always think that, it depends how old you were in that decade, your relationship with the decade will change. So a lot of my listeners were in their teens, some were in their 20s, some are in their 20s now and they want to learn about the 90s, just as like a historical event, which is scary. But anyway, as I said, I was in my 20s, so I was a reporter at a radio station in Toronto, and so for that decade, I was basically covering news stories in Toronto, but sometimes outside of Toronto. And so my connection to the 90s is really like I feel really tuned into what was happening around the world and in news in general, but also sports, big entertainment stuff, anything that was kind of in the news or in the headlines. I feel really connected to what happened in the 90s because I was so immersed in the culture at the time of covering news stories, 24/7. So that's my connection to the 90s. Also of course music. I was a teen in the 80s, so you always seem to gravitate towards the music of your teen years, but there's lots of stuff from the 90s that I also like and listen to regularly, like Nirvana and Weezer and some bands like that. But yeah, I would say those are my two big connections to the 90s.
What is Canadian like what does the 90s mean to Canada versus the US? Is there a difference? Like are there stories and moments of
Mhm.
pop culture in Canada that we may not know here in the US from the 90s?
That's quite possible. And like one for sure that sticks out right away is something that I covered early on in when I wanted to start podcasting was that I covered a murder trial in Canada in 1995, right when the Oj Simpson murder trial was happening. So I always called it Canada's Oj trial, but it wasn't a celebrity. It was an offender named Paul Bernardo who had kidnapped and killed two young women, as well as another woman that was his wife's sister. And he was also accused of being a serial rapist. So it was huge news across Canada, but as in particular in Ontario, where I'm located, Toronto. And I covered that trial it was 4 months long. So it was happening right smack dab in the middle of the OJ trial. So that was our big news event. Of course, we were still fascinated what was going on with OJ, but it was like, something that if you mention Bernardo's name in Canada anywhere now, everyone knows who he is. Even though there's been worse crimes committed since then, he's just the thing that people remember from that era. But then in terms of music, I think, as an example, like Alanis Morissette is from Canada. So we sort of gravitate towards people who came up in the 90s that were Canadian like that. But also there was a band called the Tragically Hip, and they're a rock band, and we consider them like Canada's band because they began in the 80s, but they were big in the 90s as well. They sang a lot about Canadian culture and Canadian history. And the lead singer unfortunately passed away, Gordon Downey. He passed away a few years ago now, and he was able to do one tour, but he had brain cancer. So he did one more tour, like a goodbye tour before he passed away. And it was like a national mourning. Like it felt like everybody went to the concert, all the different concerts. The prime minister went to the concert, and there was, just an outpouring of sadness. And, I think a lot of people remember the 90s that were into like rock music. They remember Tragically Hip too, which I know they didn't break out in the US. So most people in the US would be like, who? Unless they're like a real music nerd.
Got it.
And I
And
think, oh, sorry, I just thought of one other thing too. The rave scene was huge in Toronto in the 90s. And I know it was like a hot spot for the rave scene. Obviously, there were some in the US, but, Toronto was really, really big into that. And I worked at a radio station that was a dance music station. And so, was right in the middle of, rave culture. And so like everybody was into it. Like my boss was into it, and he actually sent out a memo to all staff, like not an email, but old fashioned memo that not warned, but educated people on ecstasy so that they would know, okay, so if you're going to a rave this weekend, this is what you might expect. And, this is what you should know, and blah, blah, blah. And it was like an actual official email from our boss, or not email, sorry, a memo about what you can expect at a rave, which I've spoken to him since then, and he saved a copy of it because he can't even believe he did, which is so funny to me.
now I think, Andrew, you told me what a rave was a while ago. Kathy, can you explain to me what a rave is? Because I was born in 91, so
Right.
I was too young to experience the rave culture
Yeah.
in the 90s. What is the difference between that and what you could describe as a traditional young people age
Right.
party? Because I just think like, oh, it's an outside party, but I know it's
Yeah. No, so in Toronto anyway, and I guess, there was a big scene in the UK, and I think it came over from the UK, and but they picked it up from going to Ibiza, where, I think was the initial place where it all started. But it involves drugs. So most people are on ecstasy back then, which is, I guess, MDMA now, right? And in Toronto, it was almost always held in like an abandoned warehouse. So it wasn't held at a club or some sanctioned place. And at the time, there seemed to be a lot of abandoned warehouses, but now you drive by and those places are like, oh, there's a Starbucks where they used to have a rave or whatever. So, and it was usually like word of mouth, or, somehow information was spread around of where the rave was going to be. They would go all night. It was usually like the music was essentially like what you would consider what you might hear at an EDM festival now kind of thing. So a lot of, driving beats so that the music kind of goes with the drugs is what I'm told. I actually did not attend a rave, but I knew lots of people that did, and have done an episode on raves. But so yeah, and then there was a whole culture around the clothing and the paraphernalia. So everyone was wearing their bucket hats, and they had soothers because apparently the ecstasy made you grind your teeth. So you would have a soother to kind of chomp onto so you wouldn't wreck your teeth. Drink lots of water. There usually wasn't alcohol because everyone was on ecstasy, but you got to drink lots of water. Yeah, so it was just a fun time had by all, I think, from what I understand.
from what
I
you're
will
saying.
tell you, it's a good time had by everybody. I went to a rave last week, and it was
Oh, nice.
fun.
And you're alive.
I wouldn't go to one, but I never, ever actually went to one. So I think I was working too hard. I was, always working.
Got it. So we now know you have history of the 90s, but I was looking into your background, and the idea for history of the 90s, it basically started with your history of 1995 podcast.
Correct.
It just like you took 1 year in the 90s that was pretty eventful. You're talking about the Oj Simpson trial, and then you expanded. Can you tell me about the origin story of history of 1995 and how to where you are today?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I covered this trial, the Paul Bernardo trial, in 1995. And I worked after about 10 years, I kind of shifted out of radio. I started doing public relations and a few other things. And I kind of put away all my old radio stuff. And then when podcasting became a thing, I was immediately a fan because my background's radio. So I love audio storytelling. And, essentially that's what podcasting is like old fashioned radio storytelling where, there used to be audio documentaries on radio all the time. Anyway, so I was like, oh, I would love to do a podcast because I'd been out of radio for a while and I'm like, but what could I do it on? And then it was one of those aha moments. I went downstairs in my house. I found this box and it had all my tapes and my cassettes because it was actual cassettes of the Bernardo trial that I had covered. And it was like 4 months worth of tapes from different witnesses and lawyers and blah, blah, blah. And at the time I was listening to Serial, the popular podcast, and I was like, I could do a podcast just like that, but about the Paul Bernardo trial. And then sure enough, the tape was like amazing. So I started to put it together and I thought, well, I don't want it to just be like a 4-part podcast. Like, how can I make this more? And I'd always thought that 1995 was a crazy year because, the OJ trial, the Bernardo trial, but also the Oklahoma City bombing happened that year. The prime minister of Israel was assassinated. In Canada, we had a referendum. Quebec almost separated from Canada. And you being from Vermont, you would know Quebec well. But Quebec almost separated, literally came within inches of separating. They had a referendum and it was like a 0.01% that they didn't separate. And, it would have become its own country. And it was such a big deal in Canada, obviously, in 1995. And, there were other things in Canada. So I had always thought this would be cool. So I started by just focusing on 1995. And then after the first year of that, I reached out to a podcast network and said, do you guys want to partner up? Because I was doing it on my own. And then from there, they suggested, well, why don't you do all of the 90s? And I'm like, yeah, obviously I'm going to run out of stories on 95. 90s, I think I could go forever. So, so then we partnered up and we just actually had our 5-year anniversary.
So I would have to imagine, I mean, this is just me. If I were to go from just dealing with 1 year, 1995, all right, that's specificity right there. And then now you are in charge of an entire decade.
Yeah.
Me personally, I would be overwhelmed. I wouldn't know where to start, what event to begin, like where, like what were the seeds of taking the entire decade? Like, tell me about that process.
Yeah. So, I mean, initially it was some brainstorming with my producer and executive producer, but now it kind of happens organically. Often, well, one thing I've always encouraged listeners to reach out to me and let me know if they have an idea for a show. And I have a list now of about 175 ideas for shows, and they're all good ideas. It's not like people are suggesting crazy things. They're all, I'm like, yeah, that's an excellent idea. And then I have ideas as well, things that I remember, or just as I'm researching, something comes up and go, oh, I'll put that aside for another time. But what really needs to happen, though, is I always say I need to find a way into the story. So I either have to find a book that covers, that topic, and then the author is willing to be a guest on my show and talk to me about their experience or expertise. And that, believe it or not, is not that difficult to do because we're in an era where 90s nostalgia is huge.
Yep.
So, I'm constantly seeing new books being released where someone has written about something to do with the 90s, and then they're happy to talk about it with me because they want to promote their book, which is great for both of us. But also, like I said, I do get suggestions from listeners. So I even have people now who are experts on things who will contact me to say, hey, I'm an expert on this. Maybe you'd want me to be on your show. So as in the longer you're on the air, the easier it seems to get, because just recently, someone reached out to me, say he's done a documentary on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and he'd love to chat with me about it if I were interested. And I'm like, absolutely, because I haven't done an episode on that. It's the topics that have been covered a lot that I find hard to cover, because I feel like, what else am I going to bring to the table? Like, everyone knows about, like, the one, for example, that I haven't done, and it seems like a glaring error, is I haven't done like the East Coast, West Coast rap battle and or Tupac's death or Biggie's death. Right. I really want to cover those, but I'm just looking for a way that is unique, it just hasn't happened. So I haven't figured out how I will approach it. And with the OJ trial, I did cover that, but it was from my perspective as I flew down there for the verdict day. So it was just like my sort of 24 hours in LA and what it was like outside the courthouse, outside OJ's house, as people were like celebrating the verdict. So, and then told the story somewhat in there. So it was a little different than just recounting like, this is what happened at the OJ trial, because I feel like everyone has heard that to death. And
Yeah.
just
getting
a little tired of it. But
Absolutely.
then again, sometimes I will do a topic that I think, I don't know, like maybe has this been overdone, but people are still interested. And if I can even bring some new information to the story, or, maybe it's just that they're still want to hear more, then, people will tune into it. So I don't necessarily rule it out, but I just have to find that way into the story to make it interesting for everybody.
I wonder if I gave you for example, like if I said cover the late night talk show wars of the 90s between Leno and Letterman, is that
Absolutely.
something where you can instinctively say, oh God, that's been done to death? Or is there something where there could be a nugget of information that people don't know?
That is 1000% on my list. And
Really?
yes, it is 1000% on my list. And I actually and it's kind of been mentioned in a couple of other episodes, but I haven't done one whole episode on the late night talk show war. But I definitely want to do that one. I find it fascinating, and I think there is a ton of coverage or things that could be covered in there. But I just finished writing one called 9 TV episodes that define the 90s, because an author just finished has a new book coming out called 99 TV episodes that define the 90s. And obviously I couldn't talk about 99, so we decided to talk about 9, and he pulled out 9 that he thought I should talk about. One of them was Jay Leno doing the dancing Edos. He was a skit in the 90s during the OJ trial, where it was so dumb, but it was just like 5 men dressed up as Judge Lance Ito from the OJ trial, dancing in a choreography. What's the word I'm trying to say?
Choreography.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought you were gonna say the Hugh Grant episode. I'm surprised.
Yes. So before Hugh Grant, he was, and before Dancing Edos, Jay Leno was actually being beat by David Letterman in the ratings still.
Right.
And it was around the time of OJ that Jay Leno's ratings started to go up. And then eventually when he hit when that interview happened with Hugh Grant, then he never went back. So he just kept going up and up and up, and then became, the leader in the ratings race, and ended up beating Letterman. But it all started during his coverage of the OJ trial. Sometimes he would have up to 20 jokes in a single episode, which which is crazy. It sounds like that's something you're interested in, the late night talk show wars. You sound like,
I've been obsessed since high school. I know every single thing, but I want to keep knowing the I either want to listen to the same information, or I want to know new information. So I've listened, I read every single thing about it, and if you did an episode on that, I would automatically
excellent.
listen.
Yes, no, it is fascinating, and it sounds like, if you're not from that era, I think people are like, a late night talk show war? Like, what are you talking about? Like, how could there be a war?
Yeah, because they're all friendly now. I mean, it's not what it was back in the day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, I wonder if there's a topic that you dread going into, because either, I don't know, it could just be something that a listener suggested and you just find it either absurd or the subject matter too heavy. Anything like that. Like I'll just give you an example. Like you could probably be excited for like a Beverly Hills 90210 episode, which you did, and when it comes time to covering the Columbine shooting, maybe it's like, oh God, this is going to be a really deep episode that needs to be well researched. So I wonder if there's like that sort of emotional roller coaster that you go into with the topics, or do you have like equal passion for like each topic that you cover?
Well, I do have a lot of passion for researching and writing and learning. So all topics are interesting to me.
Good. Yeah.
The thing that I find daunting is when it's a topic where I know there's a huge fan base, i.e. Phantom Menace, or comic books, or wrestling, and I know about them, but I am not a diehard, comic book collector, and I'm so scared I'm going to make a mistake that someone will catch and And I don't know, like, what are they going to do? But because I'm always worried about the fan base is going to like tear me to shreds if I screw something up, because all full admission, I did make a mistake on a wrestling episode way back when we first started. I said someone's name wrong, and I got so many bad, like, mean comments afterwards from people. And, you know, even when you mispronounce something, I'm sure you guys host a podcast, maybe it's never happened, but I swear I have a Canadian accent. I don't even know if there is such a thing, but there are certain words I say wrong. And I've had people say to me, you know, like, you shouldn't even host a podcast if you can't say that right, and blah, 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 you know. So it's a little bit intimidating sometimes. And I know they say don't read the comments, but, you know, it's hard not to. So those are the things. I don't mind doing the heavy stuff. That doesn't bother me at all. I don't know. Maybe I need therapy, because those things, I'm totally fine. You know, I've covered lots of really awful things in my career as a journalist. Those things don't bother me. It's the, you know, the fear of screwing something up when you're dealing with like a rabid fan base about, you know, Star Wars, Star Trek, whatever.
Yeah. Beyonce fans, I was wondering if you've ever done a Destiny's Child episode or
no, but like, yes, exactly. You can't, you know, the fan. Well, I've heard lately, like, you know, especially when it comes to Taylor Swift, I've heard on the Rolling Stone or on one of the podcasts that, you know, the music critics the fans have come after them. They're doxing them practically if you don't say, oh, I love Taylor Swift, right? So it's just craziness. So I don't know.
I mean, so Andrew over here is a big Beyonce stan. So I hope, Andrew, you represent the Beyonce fans that will not go crazy if she gets one fact wrong.
So I can tell you this. The first episode of yours that I listened to, I didn't know I listened to it until I went back to your podcast page today. And I was like, wait, when did I listen to violence in video games? And I had listened to the episode and I fell in love with it.
Oh, and good.
I could tell you're not a gamer, like somebody who's going to be at a video game console, but the respect that you paid and the research that you did and then the way you talked about it, if you talk the way about Beyonce, I'm going to be a stan of yours.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you. You're so sweet, because that's exactly what, you know, it's not a podcast for gamers or a podcast for people who like wrestling. It's a 90s podcast, right? So, or it's a history podcast. It's not even, I look at it more as a history podcast, even more so. So, you know, I'm trying to make it so that everyone understands, everyone's getting something out of it. If you're a gamer, you're going to know all this. So, you know, that's the idea. So anyway,
I mean, I know you lived through the 90s and your 20s, but as you're researching, producing episodes of this podcast, has there been anything about the decade that has surprised you through your research? Something that you thought you knew, but didn't really know?
Well, there's been a few stories for sure where I didn't know everything about them. And I'm trying to think of some off the top of my head. But one thing that has been surprising in the past few years has been the way that there's been a second look at the way women were treated in the 90s. There's been so many, you know, instances where women were treated poorly. I mean, even I did an episode on the Pam and Tommy sex tape. And, you know, I think everyone thought they released it. Everybody, I didn't know it was stolen. And until 5 years ago, I think there was an article that, you know, really talked about how it was stolen from their safe and what had happened to Pamela. And, you know, it was shocking to me how she was treated. So it's really eye-opening, and it is good to look back at history to see what we did wrong, to hopefully make sure it doesn't happen again, because there's so many cases like, you know, Monica Lewinsky. And there was another one recently that people were talking about. People were taking a second look at another woman, but even Tonya Harding, like, there's so many women where they were just, and I'm shocked at some of the headlines, because I do go back and look at old newspaper clippings, and some of the things that are written, I'm just like, oh my God, is this like from 1930 or is it from the 1990s? Because it's so unbelievably chauvinist and just degrading, and it's shocking to me that people took such liberties at the time. But I don't remember it, so it is surprising, you know, that it was that bad.
Yeah. I mean, if you do end up doing a late night TV episode, I mean, just the part of late night history where they were beating Monica Lewinsky jokes to death. I mean, that in itself was a prime example of how women were unfairly treated back then.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I wonder. Yes, you do fantastic journalistic research on each episode. Has there been a topic where you were tempted to just go, okay, I know every single little thing about this. I just want to knock this out of the park, just have a personal, opinionated discussion about it. Like, just take all the research off the table. I know everything. Or
Yes.
do you? Oh,
Yeah.
oh, really? Oh, go ahead.
Well, no, I'm kind of being facetious, but I love Oprah, and
Yeah.
I did an episode on Oprah in the 90s.
I loved it.
And thank you. And I find the young kids today don't like Oprah as much as we did in the 90s. And I wanted to really make it clear how much I loved her, but I tried it. My background is news, so I still like to write in a neutral way where I'm not taking sides. So I'm just trying to present all the facts, and then the listeners can decide what they think. So, but that was one where I felt very protective of Oprah. I didn't want to, paint her in a bad light at all. And I don't think I did, because I think she's amazing.
Be honest. Would you be one of those people in the audience screaming if you got a new car? Like, are you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I went to Harpo Studios in the, I think, early 2000s. So I think she'd already finished the show, but the studios were still there. And I just I was so upset that I never actually got to see her live, because I would have loved to see her live. I just respect her so much. I think she's an amazing woman. So, and her show was lots of fun.
Okay, can I ask why the young people don't like her today? I mean, my only guess is that maybe there's Oprah does have a very guided self-help nature about herself that some may perceive as inauthentic. Is that the reason?
I don't know. To be honest, I don't know. I did ask a professor who was on the podcast with me, because there was one incident in particular recently where she was trying to raise money for the wildfires in Maui.
Yeah, with the Rock.
Yeah, with The Rock. And she, it went horribly wrong, because people were like, Oprah, you're a billionaire. Why don't you just donate all the money?
Right.
And I personally didn't understand that. But I think people view her now as part of the problem, because she's so wealthy and, owns so much land in Hawaii that, she is not necessarily her, but people like her with a lot of wealth have caused a lot of the problems that we have in the world now. So I think that's what it is. I don't know. I really don't know. But I guess too, she's just not from their generation. Like, people don't, she's just some older lady who that works for Weight Watchers, or used to. So it's, just doesn't have the same impact. But I guess people of our generation, my generation, still respect her.
Got it. Andrew, you have anything?
Just one of the things I want to ask you, because listening to a couple of the episodes I listened to, also the Viagra episode, it's on my favorite podcast.
I listened to that.
Oh, good. So, yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was just going to talk about that. My guest on that one, David Friend, he has written an excellent book called The Naughty 90's, and it's a bit of a doorstop. It's huge, but it is an amazing book if you want to read about just like the sexualization of pop culture and culture in the 90's, and Viagra was a big part of it, obviously. So he was an amazing guest. So he made it a lot of fun, and that's when things go really well. It's like great topic, great guest. So it was a fun one to do.
So my favorite point, at the risk of spoiling for those listening who haven't listened to the Viagra episode, what I didn't think about was the role of the patriarchy and the invention of Viagra. How, there is this time and passion into improving men's sexuality.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, birth control, contraceptives for women, that's a hard thing to access. So that was a great point that you brought up that I really enjoyed about it.
Yeah. No, and that was David, some of his research and things he's written about, he had mentioned that. And yeah, you don't think of that. But although, at the same time, the discovery was almost accidental. So I guess the idea, though, that they pursued it shows the interest was there from the male executives and the insurance companies and blah, blah, blah. So it was a bit of an accident, though. So it wasn't like they set out to cure male impotence, but once they thought they had a cure for it, they ran with it.
Got it. Sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
No, it's okay, because that leads into my question. When you have done episodes like the Viagra episode, like the video game episode, and you're just learning more about this industry and the things that happen, Has there been anything that's been super shocking that you've discovered throughout this journey of podcasting?
My goodness, I can't really think of anything like that. But, like I said, when I earlier talked about the issues regarding, the way women were treated, I think a lot of that has been shocking to me. And it feels like, okay, we've talked about every woman now who was wronged in the 90s. And then it just keeps coming up. But yeah, no, I can't really think of anything that at the moment that is too shocking that I've learned. Maybe I know too much. No, I'm just kidding. Or maybe it's just that nothing shocks me anymore. I think that's probably more like it. Yeah, that's probably more like it.
Now, do you have any plans to do anything about the 90s incorporation of Japanese style and art and how do you say it? Like the influences of early Japanese pop culture in the 90s?
Oh, that's a good one. I did do the anime episode,
Yeah.
but beyond that, it's not something I know a lot about. But now that you've kind of, tweaked that, I might have to look into it a little bit more because this sounds like it's something you're interested in.
It is. I am a weeb. I am one of those people who just love anything nerdy and culturally appropriate when it comes to like anime and Japanese culture being influenced in American society. So I would be a huge listener and fan of that if you did.
Nice. Something that has come up a lot is Sailor Moon. Like a lot of people want to look back at the creation of Sailor Moon and just the influence it had on young women, which is something I would love to learn more about because it was I was a little too old for Sailor Moon, so it wasn't something that I was into, but it sounds like people are very passionate about it.
And what surprised me about that Golden Age of Anime episode, I was actually thinking about you, Andrew, when I was listening to that. Just the censorship, in the transition from like the original airing in Japan to America. I mean, you're talking, queer characters that were taken out, full frontal nudity in some respects that were taken out. So it is a much more different show in the U.S. than in Japan, and I was really surprised by that.
And it's the same too with our very first episode. We look back at The Lion King, and we reran it recently. And I did learn a lot that was shocking there about things I didn't realize that, that's sort of baked into the story of Lion King, or the fact that it was seems like a ripoff of a Japanese cartoon, The White Lion, I think it's called.
I think it's, what was it, Andrew? Do you know Kimba the White Lion?
Kimba the White Lion, yeah.
Yeah.
And that stuff I did not know. So that was very interesting. And and like a lot of different things within it, the racial undertones in the movie that I wasn't aware of at the time, but now you look back and you go, oh my God, yeah, like that's horrible.
The hyenas. The hyenas are all you need to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And then even like on that episode, there was even there were so many issues with it. It was such a great episode to do because there was so much to talk about, but there were even hyena researchers who were mad about the way hyenas were portrayed in the movie because they have a bad rap in the nature world that people thinks they're really bad animals, but they're not. And so it could lead to them being killed more by portraying them as bad animals. So it was just like there was so much going on there. So I guess that's what made it a fun episode.
Now, is there a ultimate idea or ultimate subject that you want to approach one day that you just haven't been able to do yet?
Like the mic drop, like, oh, I'm out now. This is the last one. But yeah. No, I really do. I do think a lot about like the East Coast, West Coast rap wars as something that I want to do because again, like I do know about it, but I'd love to do some more research so I could learn more about it as well. And so that is one that's there that I know I need to do and I just haven't gotten around to it. So or found a way into it. So that one I absolutely look forward to doing.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm also looking forward to Sailor Moon. If you do anything with Sailor Moon and you need a fan that's obsessed, please call.
Oh, excellent. I will. And also, I haven't done an episode on Family Matters, so
yeah,
exactly. Because I would love to chat with you guys about it sometime. Because I mentioned it briefly in the Black sitcom episode, but I would love to do a full episode on it.
That would be fantastic. Yeah, no, I did like the Black sitcoms episode you did though. That was fantastic. Have you done episode on stand-up comedy and where it was in the 90s at all?
The only one I did was stand up to sitcoms. So the sort of the genre of stand up comedians getting their own sitcoms. So that ended up being a 2-part episode because there were so many, because it was such a huge craze in the 90s, you know, with Roseanne and Seinfeld, and then the Drew Carey show, and
Everybody Loves Raymond, Home Improvement.
Everybody, there was so many of them. So that's the angle that we took it into it, but not stand up itself. And the other one, like late night talk show wars, is another big one that I want to do too, when I mentioned the East Coast West Coast rap. But as for stand up comedians, not so much. A lot was mentioned in that stand up sitcom episode though. With Saturday Night Live too. I haven't really done one on Saturday Night Live.
Oh, please do.
It was the best era, I think. So anyway, like other than like the original, like say John Belushi era, but like just the Will Ferrell, and it was a good era.
Please do an episode. I'm a total nerd on SNL history. It's a goal of mine to see it live for their 50th season. So
wouldn't that be amazing?
That would be great.
Yeah.
And actually, going back to Home Improvement, I was wondering if it was brought up to you at all in discussing, those kind of stand up to sitcoms in the 90s, how Home Improvement had a great run ratings wise, and yet I don't feel like people revive it or rewatch it on the level that they do with Friends or Seinfeld. It doesn't really pop up on streaming. It's not really discussed on social media. It's a really strange thing. And I don't even know if that's worth an episode, but that's just something that I think
someone's interesting. That is very interesting. And is it because it wasn't good?
I tried watching it with a friend of mine who enjoyed it as a kid a few years ago, and maybe it's because I watched it at the wrong age, but Tim Allen has always been a presence as I was growing up in the 90s and 2000s, but I could never say that I loved him. It was just he's Buzz Lightyear, he's Tim the Tool Man. I mean, I've never actually truly enjoyed or laughed at him. He was just there.
No, and I have to be honest, that's how I feel about Jay Leno too. Like I do not find him funny, and that's one thing I have noticed when I'm doing research. There's always some connection to Jay Leno, like you could say, like. And then, this person was criticized on the Jay Leno show or appeared on the Jay Leno. And like because I just did in the 9 episodes that define the 90s, we start off with the finale of Cheers, because it was in 1993.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because the finale was ran, and then it cut right to the Jay Leno show, and the Tonight Show, and they were at the Cheers
celebrating
bar. And it was a total disaster because the cast all got drunk, and he lost control of it. And he was outside of the bar, and there was like, these unruly Bostonians like heckling him when he was trying to do his opening monologue. And it was so funny because it ended up being like a disaster. And I just thought, oh my God, how does he fit into every episode that I do? He was such a presence in the 90s and not funny at all.
Yeah.
Like I just don't find him funny. His jokes are like bad dad jokes, not even.
I will say I did see his stand-up live at Mohegan Sun in my home state of Connecticut for New Year's Eve a few years ago. He's funny.
Good?
Yeah, it was good. It was good. So what people will often say is that his stand-up live is much better than what you see on the Tonight Show. It's a lot more tamer on the Tonight Show. So I don't know if he still does good stand-up nowadays, but the stand-up show that I saw was actually pretty good.
And a lot of comedians say how much they appreciate him and like him, like other comedians. He seems to be, a lot of people really like him and they find him really funny. So, it obviously just didn't translate on the Tonight Show for me anyway.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. Yeah, I mean, he has a great respect among comedians as his legend. I mean, they're divided as to how his quality was when he was at the Tonight Show, because compare it to his stand-up. But no, Andrew, if you have a chance to see that Cheers episode that she's talking about, the after show, that's really great. Because I think, Kathy, if I'm not mistaken, the cast, they came at the bar like pretty early, like maybe like an hour, 2, 3 earlier than the start of the show, where they were going to be interviewed by Jay Leno, and they hadn't seen each other in like 2 or 3 months because they taped the finale like back in April, and this was like in May or something like that. So these people who love each other and they got time to kill before they go on the air, and they're at a bar in Boston, like, what do you expect is going to happen? They're going to get drunk.
And they were like, they took like the Coke or the pop dispensers, whatever, and they're like shooting at Jay Leno as he's walking by, like water or whatever squirting out, and
Yeah.
they have like spitballs in straws, and they're just being kids, right? And he's like trying his hardest to keep things on track, but it's really really funny. And there's so many weird celebrities in the bar that like all of a sudden like all these athletes and I don't know, it was such a funny, it just didn't work. But
Now, have you done an episode on Cheers? Will you? Because I know a majority of its run was in the 80s.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I'd argue it's the best sitcom ever. I mean, I've seen that show top to bottom like twice, 3 times.
Yeah.
Not a drop in quality for me. I mean, it was funny all 11 seasons.
Yeah, it really was. And I probably won't cover it, but it is a big chunk of the next episode because I think people do associate it with the 80s, even though it ran into the 90s.
Yeah.
And also in this episode coming up, I'm talking about The Sopranos, which a lot of people don't consider part of the 90s. So it started in 99. So it's funny, like things don't necessarily follow the calendar year sometimes. Like it's like, oh, this came out in the 90s, but it really feels 80s or whatever. So with Cheers, it really feels like an 80s thing. But sometimes things the border, like the line is blurry sometimes because even like Seinfeld, it actually technically started in 89. So but it feels like a 90s thing. So
it's very much
yeah.
I think if it's like 1 year from the previous decade, it's a 90s show because
absolutely. Absolutely.
But anything else you have for Kathy, Andrew?
Just one last thing. Speaking of how like Jay Leno is interconnected with things, has there ever been anything weirdly connected that you've come across, like two separate worlds that you thought would never intersect?
Well, another thing that comes up a lot is Elton John. He seems to pop up in so many 90s stories, just like he was very active in the 90s in terms of advocacies and just being involved. Like he was just seemed to be everywhere in the 90s. And I'm always like, oh, there's Elton John again. And like there's some connection to him. Like obviously he sang at Princess Diana's funeral. But then I did a story on a young boy, I believe, drawing something White. Oh, I'm drawing a blank on his first name. I want to say Ricky White, but that's not it.
Ryan White, I think.
Ryan White. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ryan White. So he was a young boy with AIDS who died from AIDS, but he was banned from his school, and it became a big thing in terms of his trying to get rights to go to school. But Elton John was there, like became a really good friend of his and helped him out and helped his parents out and was there when he passed. And there's been a few other stories where, there was after George Michael died, there was or after Freddie Mercury died, there was a concert and Elton John was there. And I just feel like he pops up everywhere. So he's someone that I keep wondering like, oh, is Elton John going to pop up in this story somewhere? But anyway. He did a lot of great things in the 90s, I believe. And he also was making great music then, too.
Yeah. So growing up in the 90s, my introduction to him as a kid was the Lion King soundtrack.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just kind of worked backward from there and discovered his great work from like the 60s, 70s and on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Celine Dion is another big one from the 90s that I don't know if I'll do her because, again, she's 90s, but I feel like she's of everything. Like she doesn't feel like she belongs just to the 90s. So, but she also, I do think of her because, she obviously had some big songs in the 90s with like the Titanic theme.
Yeah.
But,
my mom was a huge Celine Dion fan growing up. Yeah. She loved her.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else you got for her?
That's all the questions I have. You kind of blown my mind with a couple things today.
Oh,
I have more to think about.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. Like, check out that book I mentioned if you're into 90s stuff, because I do have other ones, but that one is, Naughty 90s. I love that one. So there's just so many things that'll blow your mind. There's another New York Times, just looking at my bookshelf. Chuck Klosterman also wrote, it's just called The 90s. So it came out a couple of years ago. And it also, like, when you get really smart people writing about stuff you're thinking about all the time, sometimes they synthesize what you've been thinking and haven't been able to put into words. So both of their books are like that. So
I wonder, do you imagine this podcast going on endlessly? Like there's just never any shortage of content from the 90s? Or do you envision at some point you'll run out of 90s content to talk about? Because I think I would approach it differently if I were in your position. I'd be like, oh, okay, let's just cover a big story from each year, and then we'll wrap it up once we get to the end of 1999. But I like the way you do it. You kind of scatter around and cover various parts of the 90s. And what I love about that is that you get the sense that, God, there's so much ground to cover, you know?
Yeah, I honestly don't think I would run out. I think I would run out before I run out of topics. So I don't know, as long as we have listeners, and hopefully we'll be able to keep going. Some people have said, "Oh, are you going to start covering the 2000s?" And I'm like, probably not. Like I think I could do the 90s for a long time because, again, like I said, I look at it as a history podcast as opposed to just a 90s podcast. So even though people kind of this nostalgia for the 90s may waver in the future as people get older and then start having nostalgia for the 2000s, there'll always be interest in history because we still look back at World War I and World War II and ancient history. So I just think there'll always be an interest in what happened in any decade of time. So I think as long as there's people out there listening, I hopefully will just keep on churning out the episodes.
Any part of 90s pop culture that you find to be overrated?
Oh my God, that's a really good question. And this is going to be highly controversial. I think Friends is not that funny.
So I mean, I find it funny. Andrew, I know he watched all 10 seasons. He did not laugh much throughout because he wanted to give it a shot. He wanted to see what the hype was about.
Yeah.
And he did not really enjoy all 10 seasons, right, Andrew?
Yeah.
I only enjoy the joke about pivoting the couch when they move. I don't enjoy any of it. The rest of it's so bad.
Honestly, I think we're soulmates because that's my only one too, is like, okay, that was funny. And I will reference that. Obviously, everyone does. But the rest of it, not that funny. Not that funny. And I guess I was watching Seinfeld, and I feel like people were either into Seinfeld or into Friends at the time.
Yeah.
There was, you could be into both. But something I did, like what I did learn on making the show was that Living Single came out before Friends, and it's like an actual dupe of, like, Friends is a dupe of Living Single. I didn't know that, and I've told like lots of listeners, I've done social media posts. A lot of people didn't know that. A lot of people did know that, and I think people love it when they try to set the history straight on it because it feels like Friends is an obvious dupe, and even though the creators, oh no, we just thought of that all on our own, but yeah, right, it's like almost identical.
Yeah. It's just an example of a long history of here's Black content, and then here's white people to capitalize off of it. And me and Andrew, we've talked plenty about how Living Single was treated versus how Friends was treated.
Oh yeah, like the marketing and promotion, and nothing was equal on that, that's for sure.
Hey, Kathy, it's been a pleasure to have you on our podcast to talk history of the 90s. How can people find you if they're just hearing you for the first time?
So the podcast is called History of the 90s. You can find it anywhere you stream audio. We're on all the streamers. You can also visit our website. It's curiouscast.ca. So curious, like CURIOUS, cast, CAST.ca. And then I am on Instagram at That 90s Podcast. And those are the two places where you can probably find us, because I have narrowed my social medias down to just Instagram. Well, I do have TikTok too, but I don't do as much on there.
Good for you. Because like we're in that podcaster phase where we're trying to figure out, okay, is it beneficial to have 15 social media?
I've tried everything, and I'm down to just one. I'm down to Instagram. So
yeah.
That's where I find that my listeners are the most engaging on Instagram. So they're getting all my love.
There you go. Love it. Well, hey, thank you. I mean, we'll keep in touch via email. I appreciate you coming up to chat
with you. Yeah, I'd love to chat with you sometime about family matters. So I'll definitely reach out in the future.
Yes, we would love to do it. That would be so awesome.
Cool. Well, have a good night.
All right. Take care. See you later.
Yeah.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, how was that?
That was awesome. She's awesome.
Yeah, she's great. I mean, I just love the journalistic tone that she gives to what, I don't know. I mean, because I feel like there could be that stigma that some people put to 90s pop culture, like, oh God, it's so trivial, and y'all talking about are the video games and the cartoons and blah blah blah. But what I've always loved about Kathy's podcast is that she treats it as if it's like a CBS News special report. Like she brings a gravitas to the decade that you and I grew up with that really just makes you want to tune in and enjoy more and more of it.
It's same here. I love listening to your episodes. Like when I was telling her, I had no clue that I had been listening to your podcast this whole time. Had no clue because I would just put it on. I'm just like, oh, this is just real good. And it was the violence in video games episodes. If you're a gamer, listen to the violence in video games episode. It will change your perspective in life, even if you already know what the rating system is and how it came into be. It's just the way she reports it. It like I'm saying recording, like she's not recording a podcast because I feel like I'm listening to a very executive report. And this would be something where I'm like, shut up, everybody, stop talking. We're listening to her.
Yeah, no, Kathy's awesome, and yeah, find her wherever you get podcasts. History of the 90's. I think like the next episode I'm going to listen to is the one on like Melrose Place or Beverly Hills 9. I mean, you look at the catalog of episodes and it's like, oh my God, there's something for everybody. Even if you're not interested in this topic, you'll be interested in that topic.
You will be, and I'm going to listen to every episode now because I just want to know more.
Yeah.
And I feel like I met like a kindred spirit because she's the only other person who I've talked to is like, Pivot is the only thing funny from that show. And so I feel so seen right now.
Oh God, that's wonderful. Well, we told you how to find Kathy. You can find us at the Delicious Recap. Just search that title on Facebook, Instagram. We should follow Kathy's lead. This is getting overwhelming. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Threads, Reddit, Patreon. That's a work in progress. But yes, we're on all those at Delicious Recap or at the Delicious Recap. And Andrew, how can they follow their favorite DoorDash uncle? I love that nickname that you give yourself.
Thank you. You can follow your DoorDashing uncle on TikTok. I am going to take a note from Kathy right now. You can reach me through the podcast page on every other platform, but if you want to reach Andrew Vandertunt, you're going to have to go to TikTok at this point.
Yeah. No, hey, that's fine. Consolidate, and just conserve and just make it easier. She made a great point about, if there's one social media app that works best for you and your audience, you can just stick with that and not feel like you have to be everywhere all at once like God.
It is hard. John, I will tell you this now. Listeners, you can hear it. I cleared my notifications, and in an hour, I had 200 notifications from all of the different social media. I was like, I can't do this. I can't do it. In an hour, I got 200 notifications. It's too much.
Oh, God. It's a lot. It's a lot. Well, would you be so kind to sign us off in a way that expresses our admiration for Kathy and the 90's?
Kathy and the 90's is like eating caviar on top of Ritz crackers. It's delicious. You're not going to regret it at all. And once you swallow, you're in for the second bite. So it's some deliciousness happening there.